And now it's time for our first big story. Nigeria's education sector. Well, it found itself in the eye of a public storm this week as the Senate summoned the Minister of Education, Dr. Tunji Alausa, and the head of the West African Examinations Council, Dr. Amos Dangut, to explain sudden changes in the Senior Secondary School Certificate Examination, the SSCE, subject structure for the 2025-26 cycle. Lawmakers raised serious concerns that the abrupt removal of long-standing subjects like computer studies and civic education and several trade courses, joined with the introduction of unfamiliar subjects, could leave thousands of SS3 students ill-prepared for exams just months away. The fear is not simply academic, it's existential for students who have spent years preparing for subjects that now appear to be disappearing from the schedule. The uproar reflects a deeper tension between curriculum reform and implementation. Senators argue that reform is necessary, but when it arrives without notice, without teacher preparedness, without labs or trained instructors, and at a time when students are already in the final stretch, well, it risks catastrophe. Lights flicker on questions of timing, inclusivity, and whether schools across urban and rural Nigeria have the capacity to adequately teach the new subjects before the May-June 2006 exams. Education stakeholders, parents, and also administrators alike are asking, does reform here open doors, or does it trip up an already fragile system?
Joining us now to unpack what this moment means for students, teachers, and the future of Nigeria's education is Yusuf Abubakar. He's a principal of Supreme Education Foundation School. Yusuf brings a frontline experience running a secondary school through successive exam cycles and has watched teachers and students grapple with shifting expectations. Please welcome Yusuf Abubakar, principal of Supreme Education Foundation School.
Yusuf, you are welcome. Yusuf, first off, being in the field of play, did this surprise you at all?
Good morning, and once again, and thank you for having me. Okay, was I surprised? I would say yes, I was surprised. And maybe I should take us a bit back to where we were in August. As at August, there was no communication, no indication that there was a policy shift or reform coming on board. And so we prepared for this section using the status quo, especially for SS3 students, based on the normal WAEC subject structure. So we woke up one day, I think 3rd or 4th of September, to hear that, like everyone else, that there has been a reform and that it will take effect immediately. I think that was the most surprising of all. And it's unusual of Minister of Education, because when they do reforms in the past, they usually give timelines. I mean, phased implementation. In most cases, 3 years.
Now, Yusuf, exactly what changed? Let's understand the timeline that changed here and who it affects. Does it affect the current SS3 students? Because the government had the argument that it wasn't going to affect them. This was going to be implemented with the students who are moving into the senior secondary schools. That means the JS into SS, and that was where it was going to take effect from. So we're having contrary, differing information here regarding who it affects. Could you make that clear?
Yes, they made this clear from the beginning that it's affecting the SS3 students. And so I must make it clear, before now, as a WAEC student, you offer 8 or 9 subjects.
Okay.
So four of those subjects are pretty much compulsory for you: mathematics, English language, civic education, and then a trade subject. There are over 30 trade subjects that you need to pick at least one from. That was the arrangement before September. But after that announcement and while trying to implement the Minister of Education policy, it became that there are only 2 compulsory subjects for any student: math and English. What they did was to delist civic education from WAEC subject till 2028. And then they made trade subjects optional.
When you say trade subjects, these are...
Okay, I'm talking about photography, garment making, all of these vocational subjects. Okay. So at the end of the day, now I said there are over 30 of them. What they did was to scrap over half of them and then bring new ones on board. So the implication of it as far as we are concerned as practitioners, was that rather than have 8 or 9 subjects as a students are now left with 6 subjects, 7 subjects. That was as at October, November. And so parents, school owners, teachers, and other stakeholders cried out to government. But I must confess, as we speak now, we're at a good place because they've responded, and they've responded well.
Okay.
But now, in terms of preparedness, because I want us to look at that, because you did mention earlier on that it was basically something that came unannounced. It was declared, and then you, who are the educational implementers, were then brought into the game. And I'm asking this because for a long time now, there's been a bit of a juggle around what the government wants to introduce in the education sector. At one point, they wanted to infuse artificial intelligence and cybersecurity because they said they wanted to create an education system that made Nigerian youths internationally ready for the demand. Now, let's look at the preparedness from an educationalist standpoint. How prepared is the education sector? I don't mean just the sector, but those that are supposed to now implement these new subjects and the trainings and, teach and educate the students. How prepared are schools outside, especially outside of the urban area? So if we're looking at places like Kogi, how prepared are the teachers and educationalists to implement this and actually have the upper hand of, we know what we're doing in the classroom at this point?
Okay, I think I must approach your question this way. The reform itself is not the issue.
Right.
I mean, reform is good and it's necessary. You cannot have, curriculum itself evolves, it's dynamic. So that's not the issue. The issue is with implementation, with communication, with the way and manner it was suddenly introduced. Now, conventionally, for any policy for government, one of the key ingredients of a good policy is stakeholder consultation. This was missing, was a huge gap. I mean, and we must make it clear. Minister of Education, they have good technocrats. They know what they are doing. The Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council, they are involved in it includes professors, so they actually know what they are doing. The idea is good and is with global best practices. But what's missing is with implementation, and they fail to follow their own standard and the best practice. Like I said, the practitioners on the field were not consulted. Association of International Private School principals, schools were not consulted, teachers were not consulted, and even the students were kept. What
about the NEC? Was the NEC consulted at all? Because the NEC, the National Education Council, were they consulted at all?
And they are policy makers. I'm talking about those that will truly implement the policy.
So you're talking implementation now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So they were sidelined. And as Barrister Kelami, an education advocate, child protection advocate, once talked about this, that it was exclusionary. The major key stakeholders were not part of this policy, and so we didn't get that sense of belonging. Okay. So actually understand and also implement this policy.
So you say you're in a good place. Now, I'll note that while I ask my next question. The implications of what they had done to remove civic education, one, not considering that, there's a civic responsibility to every individual, especially the older you get, and also computer science was removed. For what reason? If you want to make students contemporary with the rest of the world, then how would you remove, what was it? Was it replaced with anything tangible?
Or better than.
Or better?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I must say this. There's even a communication gap between the Minister of Education and WAEC as a body. It's either WAEC is not getting what they are explaining, or they are not explaining well to WAEC. But clearly, ICT, that's the computer studies, was taken off ab initio from the WAEC subject registration, e-registration platform. But it's back now.
Okay.
After parents crying out and stakeholders engaging WAEC and Federal Minister of Education. Civic education is also back as an optional subject. Okay. So now 90-95% of the students can at least have there are 8 or 9 subjects that they picked at the beginning of the session.
So Yusuf, earlier on you mentioned about the standard that was perhaps not overlooked, right? And you just mentioned that IT and civic studies has been brought back. I just wanted to ask you, for them to even exclude it, what could have been, like Mazino said earlier, what could it have been replaced with that was better than that? Because I mean, before we even get to tech and all these other things, the basic understanding of IT is something that's quite critical. So if it had been removed, outside of the debates that the parents and others had, if it had been removed, what is something better than IT that they wanted to replace it with?
Okay, as far as Ministry of Education is concerned, the word there is not removed. They changed the nomenclature to digital technology. Yeah, so and as we speak now, it is not called ICT, not called computer science, it is called digital technology.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's a much more modern nomenclature that encompasses everything else.
The initial communication was that they are going to use the old content that just change of nomenclature.
Okay.
Then the question we should ask is, if this is just changing name, why now? It's like in a football match and you are changing the rule in the middle of the match.
Yusuf, that's not the only thing. And I beg to bring this argument out. How ready are schools across the nation for digital, what do you call it now? Technology, because we're talking not, the outcry you might have had would have been from the urban parents. So our children need to be, world class. But what about the rural places like Inam had asked from before? These are, there must be schools that are incapable of, that have no capacity when it comes to digital technology.
Digital technology.
Digital technology. What about that? Are the bodies looking into this? Because it seems like, at first when I heard it, I thought it was a case of capacity. We can't afford to have schools across Nigeria. We can't teach children this because we don't have the capacity. We don't have the teachers. So let's just take it out. But you've corrected that. So do they have the capacity across Nigeria, do you think, for digital technology training across all schools?
That's a good question. But as far as they are concerned, for 2026 WAEC exam, it's just changing nomenclature. The old content remains. And so the WAEC student will be assessed based on the old scheme of work, the old topics. But your question is valid in the sense that if you look at the old reforms, when civic education was introduced in 2014, incidentally, I was a government teacher at the time, and so I received no training. They only informed, my principal only informed me.
That's enough now.
That you
Google the rest.
You teach government. You should be able to teach civics as well. And so Civic itself has 2 components. There is the government part that my training is able to take care of, but it's the moral education part that was new to me as a teacher in 2014. When the vocational survey was introduced in 2017 as well, schools were not ready. I mean, in terms of facilities. Now, teachers also was not ready. And the global best practices, when you change things in the middle of the game, you train the practitioners. I mean, we have examples from IGCSE, SAT, they change mode of assessment. And if IGCSE in particular, they will send a manual for teachers for training beforehand. Sometimes online training, physical training. So that was missing at the time, and that explains why the reform was necessary in the first place. Now, we're not even learning from our mistakes in the past. In this case now, no form of training for the teachers. I mean, even communication wasn't even there in the first place. I just informed you that at August, even as a principal, we were not formally aware that there's going to be a curriculum change. I mean, that's on their part, and it's a key component of policy making, not just in Nigeria, stakeholder engagement. Because at the end of the day, the Minister of Education will not come to schools to implement these policies. It's the school owners, teachers that will implement it. And remember, we're talking about 15, 16-year-old. Behind every policy is that 15, 16-year-old as well. So I agree with you, that capacity is not there for schools that are not urban, that are not in urban, in rural areas. In fact, they don't even understand what we're talking about.
Wow.
So them is status quo. The status quo remains.
So, I mean, we know that Senate has had to intervene here and there because they are trying to balance a healthy, educational structure. I think now my question to you, going back to what you've just said, the training has not been there. Has there been any indication of a training taking place for the teachers and the principals and whoever needs to participate at this present time? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if it's being, it's running.
If it's a go-ahead.
Yes, it's a go-ahead and it's running, and the teachers and educationalists generally are not prepared, then that means in the classroom there's always going to have to be gaps because they're learning on the job. So has there been any indication thus far that training is going to take place? Because yes, again, I mean, like we've all seen right now, it's been okayed, it's a go-ahead, it's going to take place. You guys have been informed, but the training is what's lacking. So it means you are going to kickstart it with the lack of training thereof. Is there any indication that training is going to take
I'm
place?
hoping that in the next couple of months we'll get those trainings. But remember, for civic education, at least in the next 1 year, they're still using the old content.
Okay.
At least in 2028. So, and that is why I'm happy with conversations like this, so that we're able to, because we cannot move anywhere without training the soldiers on the field.
Train the trainers.
The teachers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're happy to have you anytime to have these conversations because they are critical. The future lies with the kids, and if they're ill prepared, well, I guess that's what we're going to get in the future. Yusuf, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Let's not wait until Children's Day to have you back again, because that was the last time we saw him.
Yes.
Thank you for showing up and honoring our invitation.
Thank you for having me.